And before I start, I do need to acknowledge my partner in crime, Reka Benkses. She's my Hungarian colleague, and any work I've done on the language around ageing has been with Reka, and many of the ideas for our research have been I never know what the plural of brainchild is, the brainchildren of Reka anyway, so she's very much in these PowerPoints and in what I'll have to say today. So I thought that since it's about language, and obviously I know most about language, it's what I spend my whole life thinking about, I should set the scene really with the nature of words and meaning shifts and what they tell us about society and the insights they give us into attitudes and societies. I'm going to start sort of more generally before moving on to the language around ageing, and then hopefully some concluding remarks. Always good to have three things, I was told, in a talk, so there we are, three things. Now, I hope you can read that. I wanted to start by just emphasising that words, probably more than any, well not probably, definitely more than any other aspect of language, are sort of tied to the social and cultural aspects of a speech community. So that means that they go on incredible journeys, remarkable journeys, which I've always enjoyed tracing. And I think what they do too so well is give you a wonderful insight into the attitudes, the aspects of the speech community, either present or past. Their journeys are very, very revealing. The fact that, a simple example, the fact that the word idiot goes back to an earlier meaning of private person, shows you we're going back to ancient Greece, but that shows you, this is a society where keeping to yourself was probably a pretty daft thing to do. So, we're thinking of the sort of collective mindset of that time. So they are very, very revealing. And this quote here from one of my favourite linguists, Dwight Bollinger, is still my favourite account too of meanings. We tend to think of meanings and words, words being this tight little bundle of form and meaning, but they are not. They are much, much more complex than that. And he defines meanings in this funny way. Meanings that are inside and central. Then he talks about meanings that are inside but peripheral. And then he talks about meanings that hover on the outside like a pack of hungry flies. And this is what his meaning is, that words aren't these tight little bundles. Sometimes I wish they were. It would certainly make, I'm sure, aspects of the law a lot easier if words were more like math symbols with a constant and fixed designation. But they ain't. They slip around. So I'll be referring to those hungry flies a little later. So I thought I'd just start with some, ones not to do with ageing, but actually what has driven these shifts. A lot of the sort of thinking that drives the changes around words for older people. But here are, some fairly spectacular examples, really. Celebrity, earlier meaning of solemn religious ceremony, celebration, popular public figure. So being stripped of its religious significance, of course, and it's trivialised as well. Or charisma, divinely conferred power, capacity to inspire devotion, popular aura, ability to inspire enthusiasm. Again, stripped of religious significance and trivialised considerably. And then just these two others here, I'll just fly them in there. Personality, simply pertaining to the person. Having the qualities of being a person rather than the thing. And now a celebrity. That's driven by, obviously, changes in society. This, modern ego-centred personality. And the image, representation of person and thing, cultivated favourable public reputation. Both these words have elevated in interesting ways and very revealing ways. And I should add, actually, that it's unusual for words to elevate, much more usual, and you'll see spectacular examples in a moment, of the deterioration of words in their meanings, how they become appallingly negative over time. So the things that drive these shifts, I think, are also behind the shifts that I'll be looking at in a moment. Now, I'm going to start with this. Well, I remember a long time ago, very early on in my linguistic life, I remember picking up a thesaurus and looking at the words for women and the words for men. And I was first bowled over by the fact there were just so many more words for women than there were for men. and this thesaurus. And what was also striking were the appallingly negative words for females. And in fact, English, if you can believe it, this is true, has amassed an astonishing 2,000 words, negative words for females over the years. You know, English speakers get very excited by the fact that Inuit languages might have a few hundred words for snow. Let's look at the lexical richness in our own language and what that tells us about society. So I thought this is quite a striking example, because the reason we have so many negative words for females, and also with the meaning of sort of sexually promiscuous in a very, very negative word. Bear in mind, whore was once a positive term and probably used of both males and females. So what happens is that words will narrow to female application and then over time deteriorate, and sometimes very, very fast. So here's one here. This is, you might know this old rhyme. They that wash on Monday have all the week to dry. They that wash on Tuesday are not too much awry. They that wash on Wednesday are not too much to blame. They that wash on Thursday wash for shame. They that wash on Friday wash in need. And they that wash on Saturday, oh, they're sluts indeed. So sluts just simply meant untidy person, untidy woman. And then, of course, you know, if she's untidy, then, you know, she's obviously got loose morals or whatever, but, you know, it went down that slippery slope. And once they go down that slippery slope, they never climb out again. They become very, very negative. So, you know, in Chaucer's time, it was just simply slut was a woman of untidy habits. So, you know, clearly society has very different values attached to sexuality when it comes to males and females. So, you know, this is just one area of, you know, what drives this? Well, of course, you know, these prejudices that bubble away underneath words and undermine these words. So there's a lot, you know, about euphemisms. Now, you know, it's interesting. I nearly didn't use the word euphemism because I realised that euphemism itself has deteriorated the term. When you hear the word euphemism, you probably think, oh, that sort of weasel speak, you know, the double talk, the sort of language you associate with politicians, or, you know, sneaky military speak, you know, the sort of language that turns, I don't know, death into a substantive negative patient care outcome, to quote one example. You know, that kind of, you know, kind of an Orwellian view of euphemism. But it's actually, you know, that's one aspect. You know, I can loosely call the deceptive euphemism. In a way, all euphemism is deceptive, but its motives are much more malign in that area. But that's by no means all of euphemism. We need euphemism in the world, you know, in the language. So that, you know, they're sweet-sounding, polite, inoffensive, positive terms for, you know, expressions that we'd rather not use. So yes, sure, they can be about taboos, the sorts of things we don't want to evoke too vividly. You know, the things that go bump in the night, death, disease, used to be dangerous animals in the past, you know, curiously called private parts, etc., etc., those sorts of things. But it can also be, euphemism also has an important role, and a lot of people don't think about euphemism in this way, but actually more attention grabbing. Positive expressions that actually are deliberately provoking. And I see a lot of that with the embolden idea, that there's the kind of positive expression that wants you to sit up and take notice. Those euphemisms don't sneak under the radar quite so much. You know, they're much more eye and ear catching, and they're deliberately so, and I'll give some examples in a moment. The life cycle of these different euphemisms, and there are other types, can be very, very different. Some are very short-lived. Some are long-lived, but mostly they are short-lived, unless there are changes in society that might mean, you know, the changes in, you know, well, linguistic changes will be driven by societal changes. It's unusual for linguistic change to actually trigger society change, but it can help. It can help by opening people's eyes to things, but usually, well, that's an interesting area of discussion, I think. But it's because, you know, it's concepts we carry around in our heads, not words. And so if society's kind of prejudices continue to bubble away, it will undermine the kind of euphemistic magic of a word, the positive nature. And, you know, the next generation of speakers will grow up learning the word as either the direct term or sometimes very, very negative word, which will then be avoided. So what you find is this kind of euphemism treadmill that Steven Pinker once called it, this kind of ever-changing chain of vocabulary items. And what you find is that terms for older people seem to tread this same, or did in the past, let's hope things are changing. Okay, so subject to this kind of renewal. So let me give you an example. I meant to put just the title up there to make you think of the title first. You know, he is yet in green and vigorous senility. Sort of sounds odd in modern English, doesn't it? Senile and senility are very, very negative terms, but you probably can't see the, it might be a bit hard at the back, I don't know, the entry from Samuel Johnson's dictionary, where he just simply talks about senile as belonging to old age, a consequence of old age. So it was a neutral term and could be used very, very positively. But the change, obviously, in that term, or both terms, in fact, senile and senility, have been considerable, so that it now sounds a bit odd to say, you know, a senile maturity of judgment sounds a little bit, you just would not get it in that context. Of course, you know, in medical speak, these words still have maintained their core sense, but not in ordinary language, and that's what I'm talking about here. So here we are, you know, there's the life cycle of these, you know, I've just given you 3 examples here. You know, so early English senile belonging to old age in the 1600s, geriatric relating to old people in the early 1900s, and elderly, somewhat old, verging towards old age. And now in modern English, so we've got senile, very, very derogative. These are dictionary definitions, by the way, that I'm giving here. Geriatric, I mean, the change in geriatric was extremely rapid, so it only entered in early 1900s. By the 1960s, it was already highly contemptuous in ordinary language. Now, it's interesting that elderly seems to have maintained the kind of positive aspect, although my gut feeling was always with elderly that it wasn't, and I'll give you some findings of our recent research that I think dictionaries have to catch up with what's happening to the word elderly, and I'll give you some evidence in a moment. But the interesting thing about elderly is that it's the comparative. So you've got old, older, oldest, and in fact you've got the same sort of blurriness with older, haven't you? Which is, it's a kind of paradox, isn't it? That older should be older than old, but older is not as old as old. So it's polite, if that makes any sense. That it sort of blurs the boundaries, the edges, because there's no standard of comparison. It's a bit like the fuller figure in advertising, or you know, my muesli packet that says 25% more fruit. More than what? More than a bag of oats? More than, you know? I don't know. It's when there's no standard of comparison, it allows all sorts of interpretations. That's what gives advertisers the out, of course. And there are some good examples of that. But yeah, so that elderly has that as well. So I should add that in glorious times in the past, English had what's called vowel harmony. So it was old, elder, and eldest. Just like it was strong, strenger, and strengest. The vowels changed. And so elderly is a kind of fossil of that pronunciation rule that was around in early English. And of course, you know, so it's a bit like older, it's got that comparative origin, and also we have the positive reinforcement of elders and the wisdom that comes with elders, etc. But I still, anyway, we'll come back to elder. I think those hungry flies are coming in with elderly. I just wanted to point out a rather sad fact that, oh, here we are. Oh, sorry, I had something else to say. Yeah, so this idea that, you know, society's prejudices are bubbling away, as I said earlier, you know, undermining those terms. So new positive expressions needed. But I just wanted to, as a sort of linguistic aside, that words for young people have not stood still either, which is rather sad to see the way that youth has deteriorated. You know, if I were to see, you know, if you think of youth, juvenile, adolescent, not positive. If I were to say to you, you know, well, if you saw a headline, 4 youths on the street, you know, they're probably up to no good. They're probably male, so it's narrowing to male application, and negative, unfortunately. You know, so I think you get that very strongly when you compare a youth with youngster, which has that innocence of youth still. So I just wanted to point out that these words haven't stayed still either. It's telling there. Okay, so what about ageing in Australia? So obviously for a number of people, particularly in modern times, ageing is something they don't want to evoke too vividly, and so it does fall under that taboo area. How did that come about? Our preoccupation with youth and youthfulness, this, the virtues of youth, etc. And I thought it was nice that, I don't know whether any of you know the work of Graham Davison. It came very, very wonderful account, Old People in a Young Society, and he attributes this obsession with youth and youthfulness in Australian society, Anglo-Australian society I should probably emphasise, as going back to early colonial times. It's a double whammy. I don't think he put it quite that crassly, but it's the fact that, the colonial society was always contrasted with old, as in the old country, which is used of Britain. But it was also quite literally a young country. So I think I'm right in saying in the 1850s, here in Victoria, only 0.5% of people were over 65. So people didn't have grandparents at that time. So it was quite literally a young country, as I said. And so there's this, you had the sort of positive aspects of youth. You had the optimism and the vigour, the energy. But also went with, what went with that as well was the, unruly, disrespectful, etc. that goes perhaps with, with the younger crowd. I just thought you might like some images. There's Australia, and Graham Davison makes this point, Australia was often depicted as a young gal or as a young boy in this way. And here's another one from that time, Britain as the lion, and you can see Australia, the unruly cub there with the spoon in the hand, So these were the sorts of images that were around at that time. And there's interesting commentary from that time as well. Here's John Stanley James, a journalist, also known as the Vagabond. And here he says, neither privately nor publicly have old folks that consideration shown to them here in Australia, which is evidenced in Europe and Great Britain. So, already people were talking about this kind of disrespect that was being shown older people at that time. So what about, more than a century after the Vagabond, what can we say about modern times? Times are clearly changing, and this is the longevity revolution that I'm sure everyone in this room is more familiar with than I am in work that you're doing. But I thought this quote from Alexander Kalash is a nice one, where he talks about, he was the former director of WHO's Health of the Elderly. Never before have we seen a cohort hitting the age of 65 who are so well informed, so wealthy and in such good health. We are redefining what it means to age. Obviously there are many subgroups underneath that, I realise, but I can sort of only concentrate on this for the moment. We're witnessing the emergence of a gerontolescence, which I really love, that blended word of, you've got gerontology there, or whatever aspect of that word, together with adolescence, a new period of transition. So the question is, so what's happening there with this? Times are changing. Is that what is the evidence that this is reshaping how we're thinking about old age? The linguistic evidence. What have we got there? Are we getting new expressions? Are those expressions stable, or are they going to go the same way that senile and geriatric went? Are they going to go down that, slippery semantic slope? I really liked this quote. I've always loved this quote, so that's I trotted it out. This is John McCallum, 1997. There's a new mood among Australia's aged. Rather than being described as over the hill, they can now be characterised as storming the hill, taking the high ground and holding on to it. It's really like that. So here are some of the, just some of the expressions that we've been collecting in our trawling through newspapers. How am I going for time? Oh, good. So gerontolescence, which I mentioned. Zuppies, the zestful upscale person in their prime, so that fits those many acronyms that have been for social types. Zoomers, alas, we've lost Zoomers. That was the Boomer plus Zip and playing on Zoom, but what are they? They're the Gen Z group between the millennials and, the Alpha generation? Yeah, the ones in between, they've claimed Zoomer. So that one's gone, bitten the dust. These ones will bite the dust because these are the ones that are, you know, attention drawing, fun, playful, etc. And they are typically short-lived, like much of slang really. A handful of slang expressions survive. A handful of new expressions generally survive. The lexicon, particularly these days, we are coining words at a much faster rate than ever before. Who'd be a dictionary maker, really? How do you keep up with it? Owls, older, working, less, still active. Nippies, not yet past it. And the pre-tirees, I quite like. That's got quite a life. You know, retiree, retirement. Such an awful word, really, when you think about it, sort of in its the idea of sort of retiring to a kind of secret place or withdrawing from life. Weird. And then you've got the new age, the young age, the silver surfer, and many, many more. And then you've got these other ones that are very deliberately provocative. So these are the kind of euphemisms, the positive words, the chronologically gifted, the experientially enhanced, that were around for a while. They were meant to deliberately, you know, they were meant to get up your nose. These sorts of expressions, it's like that world. I mean, I hate the term political correctness is such a fraught area in itself now. That label is also fraught. It's an expression I tend to avoid because it carries so much baggage, I suppose. You know, these expressions don't want to take the back seat like expressions like older Australian or something. They want to deliberately get out there and draw your attention to something, to the message, you know, so that you challenge the assumptions that underlie the language that we use. One of my favourite quotes recently from something written on semantics from a colleague of mine, he talks about language is to humans as water is to fish. I think that's such a good way of describing it, that we are immersed in language, but we often don't think about it. We often don't challenge the assumptions that are underlying those expressions. I think you know, language is so powerful. So these are the chronologically gifted, the experientially enhanced. So these expressions, you know, don't care about getting up people's noses. You know, they want to get the message out there. I meant to check whether chronologically gifted and experientially enhanced is still in use. I think it's still, you know, these words are still used. And then, of course, the third age. That's a very successful expression. So that was, you know, came out with this, as I'm sure you're all familiar with that book. What I think people tend to forget is that there were 4 ages originally, so now we think of it only in terms of the 3 ages. But the third age, you know, is a very positive expression. It's been around since the 1980s, of course, reinforced by those wonderful universities of the third age. So this idea that the active self-conscious senior is also implied in the healthy aging, the successful aging, the positive aging, all of these sorts of expressions, you know, emphasising the person's, you know, I suppose, responsibility in aging. But, so what does it all mean? You know, is it going to be a silver dawn or a twilight year? Certainly all those dreadful expressions like sunsetters and nightcappers have bitten the dust as well. But this lovely quote from Graham Davison, I think, where he says, whether Australia will grow gracefully and kindly depends not only on the brute facts of demography and economics, but upon how we think about older people and how we conceptualise the process of getting older. So what sort of evidence have we got for, you know, what's happening with these expressions? You know, how we think and feel about it will boil down to how we talk about it. So is it the start of the twilight years or the beginning of a silver dawn? What Reka and I did was undertook a number of studies, and I could bore the socks off you with all the studies that we did, but I'll just confine myself to the three ones that we did early on. Done some more recent ones in the last little while. But we started off with the analysis of naming practices of aged care facilities, because in between my linguistic time, I worked in a aged care facility with the appalling name of Sunset. There's an image of Sunset later. So we looked at the changes in naming practices. We looked at a survey to identify stereotypes associated with a number of expressions for older Australian, and then we looked at what the press were saying about older Australians. So let me just mention each of these. I've still got a bit of time, good. So we started off, there's Sunset in the background. It was in WA and in Perth where I grew up. I was the central sterile department. Anyway, not for long. The world's a safer place that I am no longer a nurse. So we started with 1987. That was when the term successful ageing was first appeared. So we thought we'll take the names around that time, and 2013. So the ones in 1987, as I'm sure you could imagine, evoked the kind of hospital scenario. They were called nursing homes, which is a term that we no longer thankfully hear. So it was very much a hospital scenario. Whereas the 2013 sample, all of those negative associations were replaced by much more positive concepts, independence, personal fulfillment, friendship, lifestyle, etc., etc. Lots of very appealing names, usually evoking two sorts of scenarios, family and vacation. I'll just pop those up here. So there was the family scenario, usually, you seem to imagine an upper-class family home. There was Trinity Manor. I never know how to say Broughton or Brufton or Broughton or, that's that problematic GH in English. It can have many. Is anyone? Broughton? Broughton. Do they pronounce it Broughton? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Kew Gardens, etc. Some focus on community and permanence. And then there was the vacation scenario, exotic often, holiday resort, Edwards Lodge, Princeton View, Villa Franca, etc. Focus on, individuality and, I suppose, transience, not there for, for long. But, certainly much more positive ideas there. No more sunsets. And then our survey to identify the stereotypes. So the two things we noticed when we looked at newspapers. One was that, the variety of expressions, of course, for older people, old people, the elderly, seniors and oldies. And these seem to be working with a kind of stock of stereotypes surrounding adults. So what we did was think of a questionnaire where we, in fact, some of you, I think we had about nearly 700 people. I don't know whether anyone was kind enough to fill out our survey. It was very nice. So we listed 25 stereotypical statements, which we collected from, various accounts in the newspaper. So it could be something like X likes to travel, or X are forgetful. The balance of positive and negative stereotypes there. And what people had to do was, replace the X with one of the 5 expressions. And it was a really interesting result that we had. We were very surprised that it was so consistent. So it was 663 self-selected participants. We classified them into different age groups, so young, middle-aged, younger, old, older, old, however you want to label these things. They're always problematic, aren't they? So many more at the older end of the spectrum. But, so seniors, overwhelmingly positive, which was interesting. So that word, has still remained its positiveness over this time. Outgoing, healthy, active, wealthy, happy, like to travel, lead an involved, active life, vibrant, full of purpose, or wealthy, like to spend their money, conscious about their health, etc., etc. So, all age groups, assigned these positive stereotypes to that name, to that label. Older people, interestingly too, socially responsible benefactors was the overwhelming message with the label older person, who have wisdom and experience to share, possibly conservative, benefit the working force through their experience, have wisdom and can always be turned to for advice, play an important role in their extended family's life, are reliable, serve as role models and are respected members of society. So it was very consistent, the responses there. But not so good for the elderly, I have to say, which is what I thought that, it's the elderly, bear in mind the elderly, the term has been in the language since the 1600s, so it's an old term. But yes, negative characteristics in poor health, wealth, competence, frail, fall more often, victims of mental, physical abuse, unable to look after themselves and depend on others for help, are more susceptible to illnesses and disability, prove an increasing economic burden on society. So that term was clearly, had taken a turn for the worse, and obviously dictionaries have to catch up with the meaning of elderly. It's not a simple synonym with the other expressions. So just to, in summary then, respondents were remarkably consistent in assigning positive stereotypes to seniors and older people, negative ones to the elderly. But I will draw your attention to the fact that the level of elaboration of subcategories, because we gave also an opportunity for people to respond. Younger respondents were less coherent in assigning the stereotypical characteristics to the respective, sorry, that's noun phrases. It's old habits die hard, I can always shorten that. So it seems, that the boomer generation's redefining, what it means to be old, and accordingly the stereotypes that are associated with that, with ageing. Now let me just give you the last, still got time? Yep. So we looked at, a whole range of newspapers from, again, 1987, when successful ageing came in, to 2014. According to our results, Australian English prefers overwhelmingly healthy ageing to successful ageing, which was the big one in American English. Interesting, I think. So in our time frame, successful ageing had frequency of, I suppose, nearly 2 appearances each year, whereas healthy ageing, nearly 9 appearances each year in the data that we looked at. So, the question is why? I think I've got this. Why this preference? It's that sort of success scenario that's perhaps not as big in Australia as it would be in the States. Because of course successful ageing, doesn't it, implies winners and losers. It's not, I don't think it's something that fits easily in Australian society. Whereas healthy ageing, proactive attitude to ageing, probably rooted in our long-standing tradition of welfare policies of, it's a much more caring, there's another word I was trying to think of, what it evokes. Anyway, it's all right. But I think it's interesting that there's this strong preference. So you really don't see successful ageing much at all. I don't know whether that's, be interesting. Yeah.
Is the word egalitarian?
Yes. That was one of them, and there was another C word that I was, isn't it funny how it's in linguistics, it's called the bathtub phenomenon. When the tip of the tongue, when when you've got to imagine a caricature in a bathtub and the feet are at the end, so you can sometimes see the end of the word a little bit, but you can see the front of the word really carefully how it starts. That's the person sitting up in the bathtub and everything is underneath the water in between. So that's what I'm experiencing. But egalitarian fits as well, yes, yeah. It's another word like caring, anyway. Okay, so the other thing that we noticed was an increasing preference for older Australians as opposed to seniors. So that was also my gut feeling, that older Australian was the one winning out as an expression. That's another one of these very successful euphemisms that manage just to sneak under the radar, and and it also suggests, of course, that there is a change, a rethinking that's going on. So yes, between 1987 and 2014, the increase for older Australians was, from the growth rate of seniors to older Australians was 17% compared to 41%. So older Australians much more preferred. So again, why this preference? Well, I've already mentioned that older, because of its comparative origins, blurs the edges. It's the same is true of a word like ageing. When age and aged and ageing entered English from French, it referred to the entire lifespan of a human. So babies age, of course, but what's happened is that it's now concentrated at the end of the life cycle. So that's another sort of interesting word that also has managed to escape the corrosion of the corrosion that's affected those other words. But also we have a change in thinking going on too. So this is my concluding thoughts. I hope I've got some. I started linguistics looking at grammatical change and Germanic syntax, and so I've moved into this area, quite recently, and sometimes I feel a bit nervous, a little bit out of my comfort zone, because anyway, if it were Middle Dutch syntax, I could, talk to you at length on Middle Dutch syntax. Anyway, so I think it's quite clear that there's a change taking place in conceptualisation of ageing in Australia. I think there's clearly a rethinking going on, a reshaping of the thinking and the way we think and the way we talk about ageing. So the negative associations have been replaced by positive ones. So there's this idea that the active, healthy seniors are paving the way for a redefinition of old age, what it means, what it means for that, and those stereotypes associated with old age. This is no news to anyone in this room, I know. This three-part sort of categorisation of human life, childhood, middle age and old age no longer holds, because there's this sort of youthful old age that is not factored into this simple three-part. The third age should be marked out as a stage, a new stage in life, seniors and older people. So this is actually, let me just put up the next bullet because that would make more sense. Do you remember, it was actually, you were talking about economics earlier, weren't you? I read a really positive economical account of ageing and how, anyway, I'll come to that in a moment, but this article talked about how we branded teenager. Teenager had been in the language for quite some time, but in the 1940s it got branded and suddenly teenager was all over the news. And that opened the world up to new products and new policies, drove these sorts of changes. So some branding category or marking out youthful old age, young old age as another stage in life is a way of opening politicians, policymakers' eyes to the possibilities of the age group for, and what can be done in terms of, sort of keeping people active, but also in a way that's beneficial to society. And I think we're seeing that now, most certainly. But I thought it was an interesting parallel, because this was an economist saying that we are not utilising that youthful old age enough in society, that there are some really positive economic benefits to be had when we do that. So, branding and marketing is something that generally does something to my neck hairs, I have to say. However, branding it's not all bad. It can be very, very powerful. And, the fact that life stages are, of course, social constructs. So the emergence of a new age, a third age or a, youthful old age or however you want to brand it, is, can trigger deep changes in attitudes. It does take time for society's attitudes to change, but, I think this is a way of doing it. Anyway, look, I think I did say I would stop after roughly 40 minutes, so I should probably stop. I always like that. Not that I was a surfer, but my brother still is a surfer. He's anyway, so surfing for life. I like that image. That came up, someone mentioned surfing. Oh, the grommets. Someone mentioned yeah, that's right. Anyway, sorry, and thank you very much. I hope I haven't